2 years has passed. We were in the year of 85. I noticed the closer it came to the end of the millennium, the stranger those about were. I was on stage at the tavern when I watched Danny and Paul come into the tavern. After that song come to me, Danny had silently said. I continued the song, then announced my break. I moved over to the table and leaned to kiss Danny. Darling, Tony in the back, he asked. As far as I know he is, I replied. We are leaving the kingdom. And when we do, you are going with us, he said. Danny, I am not of the circle, I said, confused. Patsy, I am of the circle, therefore that makes you of it. Trained or not, I am not leaving you here. You will go with me, he told me. I held my lips together, then nodded my head. All right, may I return to the stage, I asked. If you want, we leave out in the morning, he told me, then stood and moved to the back. I was glad I was going with him, however I was worried also, as I did not know what to do or even what to expect. I moved back on the stage. I sung maybe two songs when I saw Danny and Tony return, and he motioned for Sandy, then spoke to Jonathan. Danny motioned for me. I moved off the stage. As I did, I looked to Karen. Take over for me, I told her, and she then stepped up and started to sing. As Danny had said, we left out that morning. Those with us were Mike, Scott, Emmett, Paul, and of course Danny. Then there was Law, Brian, Tony, and 2 others, Bill and Jim. Brian was Danny's guard. Tony was Mike's guard. Law was Emmett's, Bill was Scott's, and Jim was Paul's. Then there was Lorelei, Sandy, Jolene, me, and 2 other courtesans. We all rode alone, and leaving Atlantis. I rode up beside Laura. Where are we going? I asked her. Danny tell you nothing? She asked. Only that I was coming along, for he was not leaving me back at the palace, I told her. The Count of Patsy is being charged with treason. We are going to look for him, as he has been reported to leave Patsy. It is said he is somewhere in the Slavic forest. We are to meet up with a few of the King's Circle members, as they have been tracking him from sometime last week when he left, she explained as we rode. It took about 10 hours for us to reach the camp between the kingdoms of Atlantis and the village of Sandula. When we came to the camp, I moved off the horse and started to stretch. My body was so stiff as I moved about, and the guards there took the horses to water and feed them. I watched as Sandy and Jolene moved over to Paul and Tony and healed where they were sitting. I continued to stretch the soreness out of my legs. The others had went to the fire and was setting. Darling, what are you doing? Danny asked, watching me. Getting my blood moving through my legs, I said, and they laughed. She is not used to all this riding, Scott laughed. I moved over to Danny and was pulled down onto his lap. He kissed me and I returned his kiss. Where are we to meet Jaden and his team? Emmett asked. First camp within the Slavic forest, which is 2 days from now, Scott said. Danny, we can leave Patsy here. That way she will be safer, Paul spoke up, saying. Paul, why? Danny asked. Danny, she is not trained. One, Paul was saying when Mike broke in. Laura and Bill can remain with her. Mike spoke up, and I just sat there. It was a good thing I knew they liked me, or I would be developing a complex problem. She will be just fine. She will obey me. She has never not done as I have told. Have you, my darling? Danny said. Not intentionally, no, I replied. Danny, it is just not the same, Paul said. Paul, let me worry about Danny or Patsy. I'm sorry, I lost my place when the phone rang. Paul, let me worry about Patsy, Danny said. I will be good, I said, trying to jest. Patsy, it is not that. I love you like a sister. By decree, which in a way you are on both sides. Paul said and laughed. Let us get some rest, Mike said, standing. Danny stood, pulling me to my feet, and on into the tent we went. Nothing really happened as we entered into the Slavic forest. I was a little uneasy. I rode up beside Danny and looked to him as we entered the first camp. Patsy, I have never told you to follow decree. I have told you not to. Until the time comes. I need you to. The time has came. You know courtesan decree. Follow it. Follow it just as Jolene and Sandy do. Please, he said to me. And I smiled. I kind of liked calling him master, actually. Yes, my master, I said with a smile. And he just laughed at me. As we rode to the camp, and I watched Jolene and Sandy as to what they did once they dismounted, I followed them. They moved to the side and healed. I followed, doing the same. I watched as Danny and the others moved to the ones there. I remained silent until I watched Danny and Paul snap their fingers, and I followed as Jolene did. She moved to Paul and healed. I did the same to Danny. You two go to our tents and remain. We will return in a few moments, Danny said, and I said nothing as Jolene did not respond. She stood and moved to a tent. I watched Danny move his hand to a tent, and I moved where he had indicated. I laid in the tent and fell asleep. I was awakened when Danny placed his lips to mine. I opened my eyes and smiled to him. You did very good, he said, and laid beside me. I followed Jolene, I told him. Just continue to as long as we are in this camp with the king's circle, he told me. Danny, why did you bring me when I am really not sure what I am doing? I asked. The reason is you are by decree and Thornton right, my gold courtesan, which means basically you are my head of house. If I am not within the palace, then owner rights are given to the palace administration, and I do not trust Peter, he said, and I sighed. I was not to argue with him. He owned me. He could have me do as he wished, and this was what he wished. Obedient I would be to the best of my training. That night I tried to think back as to how I was to be when my master James owned me, hoping that would assist me some, as Danny was not assisting me much at all. The next night we set off on foot through the Slavic forest. The reason we did not ride was for it would be hard for the horses to maneuver under the tree and through the brush. I followed the dirt trail with the others. We had to enter a small town in the forest. We stood at the entrance. Jaden, who was the admiral of the team of the Circle of Dekion, looked to Jolene, Sandy, and me. We enter into the town of Slavic. The girls need to be restrained. Jaden said. Scott looked at the three of us. Lock wrist, he ordered. Now I knew what that meant, so I placed my wrist behind my back, taking my left hand, I gripped my right wrist, and taking my right hand, I gripped my left wrist. They are, Scott said. Scott, I know they are trained of the circle. However, the people of this town are very cruel. You know this. Jaden, I heard protest. Jay, drop it. We are Executive Prince. We are the Sultan Circle. They best not tally with us. They are restrained by their said decrees. Now continue. Emmett said sternly. Yes, Your Highness, Jaden said, and we followed them into the town. Now the reason we had to enter the town to begin with was because if we had went around the town, there was life sand, and it was dangerous to travel around it, as you cannot distinguish the life sand from the dirt path. We will stay here for the night, as it is not safe after the second sun sets in the forest. Jaden informed all of us. Call me clumsy or untrained. I am not sure which. Looking back, I would say both. As we moved around the town, my foot found a root, and down to the ground I moved. Now, when one is falling, it is second knowledge to try and prevent one from falling by the use of one's hands, and that is what I did. I broke my fall by catching myself. Jaden was far from being impressed. Scott, she is not restrained, he snapped, as I had Danny and Emmett now on each side of me. Patsy, are you all right? Danny asked, as my knee was now scraped up and my left palm was also, as a scrape root had cut it. Yes, my master, forgive your girl, I said, and quickly moved to a heel, locking my wrist. Jaden, she tripped. She would not break the command for any other reason, Scott said in my defense. Right. I had the feeling this is not going to go good. If any had seen her, Jaden started to say. They did not, Emmett said, and if they had, they would not have remembered it. Scott then added, now let us get to where we are staying. Scott continued to say as Danny now had his hand over both my wrists and his arm about me. Not sure if it was going to assist me in walking or making certain I could not unlock my wrist. We moved on through the town. I felt regretful for those I saw as they were all in chains, and when you passed them they fell to the ground and placed their heads to the ground. I did not understand this, however, said nothing and kept walking with the others. As we entered into a hut-looking building, Danny let go of my hands. I watched as the other girls knelt, and I did the same. Then a knock came to the door, and Jaden opened it. As a man moved into the room, Royal bow, Scott called, and I watched as the others moved their heads to the floor, so I did the same. I could feel Jaden watching every move I made, and it made me very uneasy. Dismissed, follow Bill to our sleeping chambers, Scott then ordered, and I looked to see what Jolene and Sandy were doing, and watched as they crawled to follow, and I did the same. I was for some off reason scared. I could not explain it. I was uncertain of what I was doing, and I feared I would cause them harm. Danny really should have brought me and left me at the Devar.